I remember the exact moment I realized my own mother was willing to destroy my life for money. I was locked in a dark basement, my hands shaking, my phone clutched tightly against my chest as I whispered into it, "Please send someone. She won't let me out." Upstairs, I could hear her voice, calm, confident, like she had already won. But she didn't know what I had just done, and she definitely didn't know who was about to knock on our front door. My name is Nora Whitmore. I'm 28 years old, and until recently, I lived in a house that never once felt like a home. From the outside, our life looked perfect. Quiet suburban street, clean white porch, a father who worked long hours, and a mother who always smiled just enough to keep up appearances. But behind closed doors, everything was different. My mother didn't believe in love. She believed in leverage. Every conversation, every decision, every relationship in her life had one purpose: money, not comfort, not security, control. And I was her biggest opportunity. My father? He wasn't a bad man. That's what made it worse. He saw everything. He knew exactly how she treated me, how she twisted my choices, how she turned every argument into a guilt trap, how she made me feel like I owed her my entire existence. But he never said a word. Not once. I used to wait for him to step in, to raise his voice, to tell her to stop, but he never did. Eventually, you stop expecting someone to save you when they've spent your entire life proving they won't. So I learned to stay quiet, to survive, to keep my head down and avoid becoming the center of her attention. But that only works until the day you become the plan. And the day my mother decided my future for me was the day everything started to fall apart. Living in that house felt like walking on glass. You learned quickly where to step, what to say, and most importantly, when to stay silent. Every morning started the same way. My mother's voice echoing through the hallway, sharp and precise, like she was already irritated the moment she opened her eyes. It didn't matter what I did, made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, stayed out of her way, she always found something wrong. "Why is this here? Why didn't you do that? Do you ever think ahead, Nora?" It wasn't just criticism, it was control. She had this way of making everything feel like it belonged to her, including me. The house, the decisions, even the air I breathed. It all felt like it came with conditions. And my father? He'd sit at the dining table, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the newspaper like nothing was happening. Sometimes his fingers would tighten around the cup like he wanted to say something, like he knew it wasn't right, but he never looked up. Not once. I remember one night, I must have been 23, I told her I wanted to apply for a job in another city. It wasn't even far, just far enough to finally breathe. She laughed. Not a soft laugh, not even a surprised one. It was cold, dismissive, like I had just said something stupid. "You? Live alone?" she said, shaking her head. "You can barely handle responsibility here." I tried to explain. I told her I had skills, that I could work, that I wanted to build something for myself. For 1 second, just one, I thought maybe my father would step in. He didn't. He just took another sip of his coffee. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. I stopped asking for permission. After that, I began building a life she couldn't see. Late at night, when the house finally went quiet, I would sit on the edge of my bed with my laptop glowing against the darkness. I taught myself skills she never thought I could learn. I took small jobs, one after another, saving every dollar in an account she didn't know existed. It wasn't much at first, but it was mine. My escape wasn't going to come from a door she opened for me. It was going to come from something I built in silence. Still, no matter how careful I was, no matter how small I tried to make myself in that house, there was always this tension, like something bigger was coming, like she was watching, waiting. And deep down, I think I knew. I wasn't just living under her control anymore. I was being positioned for something I hadn't agreed to. My mother didn't just like money, she chased it the way some people chase oxygen. Everything in her world had a price tag attached to it. People weren't people to her. They were connections, opportunities, leverage, and if you weren't useful, you were invisible. Growing up, I watched her measure everything in dollars. Birthdays weren't about celebration, they were about appearances. She'd spend just enough to impress the right people, then complain about every cent the moment they left. I remember one year, she returned half my gifts the next day because, in her words, "You don't need all this. It's a waste." But when her friends came over, the table was full. Expensive dishes, designer candles, wine she never let us touch. She didn't do it out of generosity. She did it to maintain an image. Because to her, image was currency, and currency was power. I learned early on that love, in her world, was conditional. It wasn't something you were given. It was something you earned. And the only way to earn it was to be valuable. There was a time when I thought maybe she just wanted security, that maybe everything she did came from fear of not having enough, of losing control. But that illusion didn't last long. I was 16 when she sold my grandmother's jewelry. Pieces that had been passed down for generations, items my grandmother had specifically left for me. She didn't even hesitate. "They're just things," she said flatly when I asked her why. "And things can be turned into better things." Better things. Like the new car parked in the driveway the next week. I remember standing there, staring at it, realizing something I had never fully accepted before. To her, nothing had emotional value, only financial value. And if something, or someone, could be traded for something better, she wouldn't think twice. That realization changed the way I saw myself in her life. I wasn't her daughter. I was an asset, an investment she had been shaping, controlling, and waiting to cash in at the right moment. Every compliment she ever gave me suddenly made sense. Every time she told me to look presentable, every time she pushed me into rooms with people I didn't know, every time she introduced me with that same rehearsed smile, it wasn't pride, it was strategy. And the older I got, the clearer it became. She wasn't raising me. She was preparing me for something bigger, something more profitable. And I think, deep down, I always knew. One day she was going to try and trade my future for the highest offer. The day my mother introduced me to her perfect opportunity, she was unusually calm. That should have been my first warning. She spent the entire morning preparing the house, rearranging furniture that didn't need rearranging, polishing surfaces that were already spotless, changing outfits twice before settling on something that screamed quiet luxury. It wasn't for comfort, it was for display. "Be presentable today," she told me, her eyes scanning me like I was something on a shelf. "We're having important guests." Important. That word always meant the same thing in her world: money. Around noon, a sleek black car pulled into our driveway. I watched from the hallway window as a woman stepped out first. Tall, elegant, the kind of presence that didn't need to try. Everything about her said wealth, real wealth, the kind my mother had always been chasing. Behind her, a young man stepped out more slowly. He was about my age, maybe a little older, well-dressed, carefully groomed, but something about the way he moved caught my attention. His steps were uneven, slightly delayed. His hand rested briefly on the car door longer than necessary, like he needed the support. I didn't stare, but I noticed, and in that moment, something inside me tightened. My mother greeted them at the door like she'd been waiting her entire life for this exact moment. Her voice softened, her smile stretched just enough to feel real, and suddenly, she wasn't the sharp, controlling woman I knew. She was charming, polished, strategic. "This is Nora," she said when she finally pulled me into the room. Her hand pressed lightly against my back, guiding me forward like she was presenting something, like I was part of the arrangement. The woman introduced herself, graceful, composed, and her son followed. His voice was gentle, respectful, There was nothing wrong with him as a person, nothing that deserved judgment. But that wasn't the point. The point was, I hadn't chosen to be there. We sat down. Small talk started, but it didn't feel like conversation. It felt like evaluation. My mother kept steering everything, mentioning my qualities, my discipline, my potential. She spoke about me like she was listing features, not talking about her daughter. And then at one point, she said it. "So," she smiled, glancing between me and him, "I think they'd make a wonderful match, don't you?" My heart dropped. Just like that. No discussion, no warning, no asking me what I wanted. She had already decided. The room didn't react the way I expected. No one looked shocked. No one questioned it. The woman simply smiled, interested, thoughtful. Her son stayed quiet, his eyes briefly meeting mine before looking away, like even he understood something wasn't right. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. My mother's hand tightened slightly on my arm, a silent warning. Don't embarrass me. The rest of the afternoon blurred together. Conversations about future stability, shared values, comfortable lives. Every sentence wrapped in politeness, but carrying one clear message. This is happening, and I was just supposed to agree. When they finally left, my mother didn't waste a second. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her voice low but excited. "Do you have any idea what kind of life this could give you?" Give me or give her? I finally found my voice. "You didn't even ask me." She looked at me like I had just said something ridiculous. "I don't need to ask you," she replied calmly. "I know what's best." That familiar coldness crept back into her tone, the same one she used whenever she'd already made up her mind. "You're not throwing this away, Nora. Opportunities like this don't come twice." Opportunities. That's all it was to her. Not a marriage, not a life, a transaction, and standing there in that moment. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not confusion, but something heavier, something sharper. I felt trapped, because for the first time, I realized she wasn't just planning my future anymore. She was trying to sell it. After that day, the house changed, not in a loud, obvious way, but in something quieter, heavier, like the air itself had been tightened. My mother didn't bring up the proposal right away. She didn't need to. She started small. "You should think about your future," she said one morning, placing a cup of coffee in front of me like nothing had happened. "Security matters more than feelings." I didn't respond. That was her first move. Plant the idea, make it sound reasonable. But over the next few days, the tone shifted. "You're almost 30, Nora. Do you think you can just wait forever? Men like him don't come around often. Do you know how many girls would beg for this chance?" Every sentence sounded like advice, but it wasn't. It was pressure, disguised as concern. I tried to stay calm. I told her gently at first that I wasn't interested, that I didn't want this, that I needed time to figure out my own life. She didn't like that, not one bit. The first real crack came 3 days later. We were in the kitchen. My father was sitting at the table, flipping through his phone like he always did, present, but not really there. "I said no," I told her, keeping my voice steady. She froze for a second. Then she slowly turned toward me. "No?" she repeated, like the word didn't make sense to her. "Yes, I'm not doing this." Silence filled the room, and then she smiled, not a warm smile, not even an angry one, a dangerous one. "You don't get to say no," she said quietly. My chest tightened. "It's my life." "No," she cut in, her voice sharper now. "It's the life I gave you." There it was, the guilt, the invisible chain she had wrapped around me my entire life. "Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me," she continued. "And this is how you repay me? By throwing away the best opportunity you'll ever get?" I glanced at my father. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even look up. Something inside me sank, but I didn't back down. "I'm not marrying someone I don't love." That's when the room changed. Her expression hardened instantly. The mask dropped. Love? She scoffed. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't build a future. Money does. She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping into that cold, controlled tone I knew too well. You think you're strong enough to walk away from this? She asked. Fine. She paused, just long enough for it to sink in. Then you can walk away from this house too. The words hit harder than I expected, not because I didn't see it coming, but because of how easily she said it. Like I was nothing, like I could be replaced. You either marry him, she continued, her eyes locked onto mine, or you pack your things and get out. No money, no support, nothing. For a second, just a second, fear crept in. Because despite everything, this was still my home. Or at least, it had been. I looked at my father again. This time, our eyes met. And for a moment, I saw it. Guilt. Regret. Maybe even a flicker of something else. Something that looked like it wanted to speak. But just as quickly, it disappeared. He looked down again and said nothing. That silence hurt more than anything she had said, because it confirmed what I had known for years. I was on my own. I turned back to her, my hands clenched at my sides. You can't force me, I said quietly. Her lips curled slightly. Watch me. From that moment on, everything escalated. She stopped pretending. The pressure became constant, relentless. Every conversation turned into an argument. Every silence felt like a warning. And the worst part? She wasn't bluffing. I could see it in her eyes. She was ready to throw me out, like I meant nothing, like I was just another deal that refused to close. And deep down, I knew she wasn't going to stop until she broke me. What my mother didn't know was that I had already started leaving her world long before she tried to trap me in it. Not physically, not yet, but quietly, piece by piece. I was building something she couldn't touch. It started almost a year earlier, on a night when I couldn't sleep after one of her endless lectures about security and status. I remember sitting in the dark, my laptop open, staring at a blank screen, realizing something I had been avoiding for years. No one was coming to save me. If I wanted a way out, I was going to have to build it myself. So I did. At first, it was small, almost insignificant. I took on freelance work online, simple tasks, things I could learn quickly, writing, editing, digital projects, anything that paid, even if it wasn't much. I didn't care about the amount. I cared about what it meant. It was mine. Every night, after the house went quiet, I worked. Sometimes until 2, 3 in the morning. My eyes burned, my fingers ached, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was creating options. I opened a separate bank account, one my mother didn't know about. Every dollar I earned went there. I tracked everything carefully, hiding emails, deleting notifications, making sure there was no trace. It wasn't just money, it was freedom, in small, quiet pieces. And slowly, those pieces started to grow. Weeks turned into months. Small projects turned into bigger ones. Clients came back. My work improved. My confidence followed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something real. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights when her voice still echoed in my head, telling me I wasn't capable, that I'd fail, that I needed her. But every time I looked at that balance, slowly increasing, I remembered why I started. I wasn't doing this to prove her wrong. I was doing this, so I'd never have to depend on her again. And then, something changed. I landed a project, bigger than anything I'd done before. It wasn't just quick work. It was consistent, stable. The kind of opportunity that could actually turn into something long-term. I remember staring at the offer on my screen, my heart racing. For the first time, leaving didn't feel like a dream. It felt possible. That's when I started planning seriously. I researched apartments, calculated expenses, built a timeline in my head, quietly, carefully, making sure everything aligned before I made a move. Because I knew one thing for sure. If I left, I wasn't coming back. But I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my father, especially not her. Because if my mother had even the smallest hint of what I was doing, she would have found a way to stop it. And looking back now, I think she sensed something. Maybe not the details, but the shift. The way I stopped arguing. The way I stopped reacting. The way I started pulling away. She didn't know why, but she could feel it. And that's when her pressure turned into something more aggressive, more desperate, because for the first time, she was losing control. And she wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The final confrontation didn't happen in some dramatic, unexpected way. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it worse. I had just closed my laptop after finishing a project, one that pushed my savings higher than they had ever been. For the first time, I felt close to leaving, close to being free. And maybe that confidence showed. Because when I walked into the living room, my mother was already waiting, sitting perfectly still, watching me. "We need to finalize things," she said, her tone calm, too calm. My chest tightened. What things? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. It was a photo. Me, sitting across from that same man a few days earlier, caught in a moment I hadn't even realized was being documented. "They've agreed," she said. "We're moving forward." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, moving forward?" "I mean," she said, standing up slowly, "you're meeting them again this weekend. This time, we'll make it official." Official. Like this was already decided. Signed. Sealed. "No," I said. The word came out stronger than I expected. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Excuse me?" I said no. I repeated, my voice steady now. "I'm not doing this." For a moment, there was silence. And then, something in her snapped. "All these years," she said slowly, her voice trembling, not with emotion, but with anger. "Everything I've done for you, and this is how you behave?" I didn't move. "You're not doing this for me." Her expression hardened instantly. "I am doing exactly what's best for you." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're doing what's best for you." That was it. That was the line I had never crossed before. And the moment I did, everything changed. Her hand slammed down on the table, the sharp sound echoing through the room. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" "I know exactly what I'm refusing," I shot back, "and it's not my life." For a split second, I thought she might actually hear me, but then I saw it in her eyes, that cold calculation, that same look she had the day she sold my grandmother's jewelry. Decision made. "You don't get a choice anymore," she said quietly. My pulse quickened. "Yes, I do." "No." She stepped closer, her voice dropping into something darker. "You really don't." I felt it then. Not just anger, not just pressure, but something more dangerous. Control slipping, and her trying to grab it back. "I'm not marrying him," I said one final time, clear, final, unbreakable. And that's when she lost it. The calm disappeared. The control cracked. "Fine," she snapped, her voice suddenly loud, sharp, echoing off the walls. "Then maybe you need some time to think about your decisions." Before I could react, she grabbed my arm, hard. "Let me go," I said, pulling back. But her grip tightened. "You're not walking away from this," she said through clenched teeth. Everything happened fast after that. Too fast. She dragged me down the hallway toward the back of the house. My heart started racing, panic rising in my chest as I tried to pull free. "Stop," I shouted. "You can't do this." But she didn't stop. She opened the basement door and pushed me forward. I stumbled down the steps, catching myself just before I fell completely. And before I could turn around, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final decision. And then the lock clicked. For a moment, I just stood there in the darkness, my breath uneven, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. Upstairs, I heard her footsteps walking away, calm, certain, like she had just solved the problem. But standing there, in that silence, something inside me didn't break. It changed, because for the first time, I realized she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The darkness in the basement wasn't complete, but it was heavy, dim light leaking through a small window near the ceiling, barely enough to make out shapes. The air felt cold, still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. This wasn't a threat anymore. She had actually locked me in. My hands started to shake as I rushed up the stairs and grabbed the handle, pulling hard. Nothing. "Open the door!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "This isn't funny!" No response. I hit the door again, harder this time. "Mom, open it!" Silence, the kind that makes you realize no one is coming. For a moment, panic took over. My chest tightened, my breathing became uneven, and a wave of fear hit me all at once. I looked around. Old boxes stacked in corners, a broken chair, dust covering everything. It felt like I had been pushed into a place that didn't exist anymore. Like I didn't exist anymore. I slid down against the wall, my hands pressed against my face, trying to slow my breathing. This can't be happening. But it was. And the worst part? She meant it. This wasn't about making a point. This was about control, about breaking me down until I gave in, until I said yes. Tears filled my eyes, but they didn't fall, because something inside me stopped them. A thought, sharp, clear. If I gave in now, this would never end. Not the control, not the manipulation, not the life she had planned for me. This wasn't just about one decision anymore. This was about everything. Slowly, I lowered my hands. My breathing steadied, and the fear that had been rising in my chest started turning into something else, something colder, stronger. She thought locking me in here would make me weak. She thought I'd panic, beg, give up. But sitting there in that silence, I realized something she didn't. I wasn't trapped, not really, because for the first time in my life, I had a choice. And I wasn't going to let her take it from me. My hands were still shaking when I reached into my pocket, but my voice wasn't. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for a second longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I understood what it meant. There was no going back after this. No pretending, no fixing things quietly. This was the line, and once I crossed it, everything would change. Good. I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, and then, 911, what's your emergency? For a split second, my throat tightened, but then I spoke. My name is Nora Whitmore, I said, steady, clear. I've been locked in a basement by my mother. She's trying to force me into a marriage I refused. There was a pause on the other end. Then the tone shifted. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? I looked around the basement again, the locked door, the silence above me. Yes, I answered. I am. Okay, stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Those words. They didn't just bring relief. They brought control. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping someone would step in. I made the call, and as I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the calm voice guiding me through the next few minutes, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Because this time, I chose myself. I don't know how much time passed after the call. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. but every second stretched longer than the last. I sat on the cold floor, my back against the wall, phone still in my hand. The voice on the other end stayed calm, steady, asking simple questions, keeping me grounded. "Can you hear anything upstairs?" I held my breath for a moment. "Yes," I whispered. "She's moving around." Footsteps, slow, controlled. Like nothing had happened, like locking her own daughter in a basement was just another decision in her perfectly planned day. That used to scare me. Now, it didn't. Then suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the house, loud, firm, unmistakable. My heart skipped. That was them. Upstairs, everything went quiet. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then another knock, stronger this time. "Police! Open the door!" I closed my eyes for a second, letting the sound settle in. This was real. This was happening. I could hear movement again, quicker now, less controlled. My mother's heels against the floor, her steps no longer calm, no longer confident. She hadn't expected this. Of course she hadn't. To her. I was still the girl who stayed quiet, who obeyed, who never pushed back. Another knock. "Ma'am, we need you to open the door." I imagined her standing there, frozen for a second, trying to think her way out of this, trying to rearrange the situation like she always did. But this time, there was no version of the story she could control. The door upstairs finally opened. Muffled voices followed. "Yes? Is there a problem?" Her voice, smooth, polite, pretending. "There's been a report. We need to come inside." A pause, just long enough to reveal the crack in her confidence. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Ma'am," the officer cut in, firm now. "We need to check the property." Silence. And then, footsteps again. This time, not just hers, multiple, heavy, moving through the house, getting closer. Each step felt like a countdown, and for the first time since she locked that door, I knew something she didn't. Her control was over, and she could feel it. The footsteps stopped right above me. Then, a voice, closer now. "Basement's down here." My breath caught. A second later, I heard the handle move. Locked. "Ma'am," one of the officers called out, his tone sharp. "Why is this door locked?" No answer, just silence, the kind that says everything. "Open it," he said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then finally, the sound of keys. They rattled slightly, shaking. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Light spilled down the stairs, cutting through the darkness that had surrounded me just minutes ago. For a moment, no one moved. Then I stood up, slowly, steady, and I walked up those steps, one by one, not as someone being rescued, but as someone who had already decided she was done being controlled. When I reached the top, everything froze. 2 officers stood in the hallway, and behind them, my mother. Her face had changed, the calm was gone, the control gone. For the first time in my life, she looked unsure, afraid. Our eyes met, and in that moment, she knew. This wasn't something she could fix. Not this time, not ever again. For a moment, no one said anything. The silence in that hallway felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. The officers looked between us, reading the tension, waiting. And then, I saw him. My father was standing near the living room doorway, frozen, like he had just walked into a version of reality he could no longer ignore. His eyes moved from the officers to me, and then slowly to her. "What is going on?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. No one answered, because the truth was already there, visible, undeniable. I took a step forward, my voice calm but firm. "She locked me in the basement." The words landed hard. I watched his face change. Confusion first, then disbelief, and then something deeper, something darker. He turned toward her. "That's not true," he said quickly, almost like he needed it to be false. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No explanation, no excuse, just silence. And that silence was enough. "You locked her in there?" His voice rose, sharper now, disbelief turning into anger. "Our daughter?" "She was being difficult," she started, her tone defensive, trying to regain control. "Difficult?" He cut her off, his voice louder than I had ever heard it. "So you lock her away like she's what? A problem you can hide?" I stood there, stunned. This was the man who had stayed silent my entire life. And now he was finally speaking. Not just speaking. Standing. "She refused to listen," my mother snapped, her composure cracking. "She's throwing away everything I arranged for her." "For her?" He stepped closer, his face tight with anger. "Or for you?" That hit. I saw it in her expression. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. "You knew," he continued, his voice shaking now. Not from fear, but from something else. "You knew what you were doing, and I let it happen." That last part wasn't for her. It was for me. And for the first time, I saw it clearly, the guilt he had carried all these years. "I should have stopped this a long time ago," he said quietly. Then he straightened and looked directly at her. "But I'm stopping it now." Everything unraveled after that. Quickly, completely. The officers stepped in, taking control of the situation. They asked questions, clear, direct, impossible to twist. I told them exactly what happened. This time, I didn't hold anything back. My mother tried. Of course she did. She shifted her tone, softened her voice, tried to explain it away like a misunderstanding. "She was emotional," she said. "I was just trying to calm her down." But it didn't work. Not anymore. The truth was too obvious. And for once, no one was on her side. Not even him. "I'm filing for divorce," my father said, his voice steady now. No hesitation, no fear. The words hit the room like a final verdict. She turned to him, stunned. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied. "What you did, there's no coming back from that." For the first time, she looked lost. Not angry, not controlling, just exposed. The officers informed her she would need to come with them. There were procedures, reports, charges to review, words she had never expected to hear directed at her. As they guided her toward the door, she looked back at me. For a second, I thought she might say something. Apologize, explain. But she didn't, because there was nothing left to say. The front door closed behind her, and just like that, everything she had built, every plan, every control, every manipulation started to collapse. And I stood there, in the silence that followed, realizing something I had waited my entire life to feel. She had finally lost. The house felt different after they took her away, not quieter, just empty, like something heavy had been lifted. But the weight of everything that had happened was still hanging in the air. For a few minutes, neither of us moved. My father stood near the doorway, staring at the same spot where she had been just moments ago. His shoulders looked heavier than I had ever seen them, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry at him, just distant. I turned and walked toward the stairs, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving, like I already knew what came next. When I stepped into my room, everything looked the same. The bed, the desk, the window I had stared out of so many nights, wondering what life felt like outside of these walls. But it didn't feel like my room anymore. It felt like a place I had outgrown. I opened my closet and pulled out a bag, one I had packed in my head 100 times before, but never actually touched. Until now. I didn't take much, just the essentials, a few clothes, my laptop, the things that mattered, not the things she had chosen for me, the things I had built for myself. Every item I placed into that bag felt like a decision, a quiet declaration. I'm done. When I walked back downstairs, my father looked up. For a second, it felt like he was about to say something. Maybe stop me. Maybe ask me to stay. But he didn't. He just nodded. A small, silent acknowledgement. And somehow, that was enough. I walked past him, toward the front door, the same door I had imagined leaving through so many times before. Only this time, it wasn't in fear. It wasn't in anger. It was in control. My hand rested on the handle for a moment. I took a breath, and then I opened it. The air outside felt different, lighter, real. I stepped out onto the porch, the evening sun stretching across the quiet street, casting long shadows behind me. For a second, I just stood there. No voices, no pressure. No one telling me what my life was supposed to look like. Just silence and possibility. I walked down the steps slowly, each step feeling like a layer of the past falling away behind me. I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the door, not at the life I was leaving behind. Because there was nothing there for me anymore. Whatever that place had been, it was no longer mine. And as I reached the end of the driveway, one thought settled clearly in my mind. I didn't escape. I chose to leave. And that choice changed everything. The first night on my own wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no breakdown, no second thoughts. Just a small room, a quiet hum of the air conditioner, and me, sitting on the edge of a bed that didn't belong to anyone else. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The next morning, reality settled in. No safety net, no one to fall back on, no one controlling me either, just me, and everything I had been quietly building for the past year. I opened my laptop and got to work, not because I had to, but because I chose to. At first, it wasn't easy. There were days when projects slowed down, clients disappeared, payments got delayed. I had to budget every dollar carefully. Rent, food, bills, everything calculated down to the smallest detail. There were nights I sat there staring at my screen, wondering if I had made the right decision, if I had walked away too soon, if I could really do this on my own. But then, I'd remember that basement, that locked door, that moment where I chose myself. And suddenly, going back was never an option. So I kept going. I improved my skills, took on harder projects, learned things I never thought I could handle before. Slowly, my work started speaking for itself. One client turned into two. Two turned into five. Five turned into something steady. Then something real. Months passed. And without even realizing it, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing. My income stabilized, then increased. I upgraded my setup, moved into a better apartment, built a routine that no one controlled but me. Every small win felt bigger than it should have, because none of it was handed to me. I earned it. There were still hard days, days when things didn't go as planned, when I felt tired, when the pressure of doing everything alone weighed on me, but those days didn't break me anymore. They pushed me, because now I knew what I was capable of, and for the first time in my life, I trusted myself. A year after I walked out of that house, I stood in front of a window in my new place, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, reflecting off the glass, and I realized something. I wasn't the girl who used to sit quietly in a corner, waiting for permission to live her life. I wasn't the girl who stayed silent to keep the peace. I had become someone else, someone stronger, someone independent, someone free. And the best part? I was just getting started. By the end of that first year, everything had changed. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, intentionally, piece by piece. What started as late-night freelance work turned into something bigger than I had ever imagined. I stopped taking random projects and began choosing my clients. I built a brand, a real one, something with my name on it, something no one could take away from me. I remember the first time I declined an offer that didn't align with what I wanted. A year ago, I would have taken anything. Now, I had standards. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just making money anymore. I was in control. My business grew faster than I expected. Referrals came in, contracts got bigger, the work became consistent, then profitable, then scalable. I hired help. I built systems. I created something that didn't just support me. It reflected me. Confident, independent, uncompromising. And the biggest change? It wasn't the income. It was me. I carried myself differently. I spoke differently. I didn't shrink in conversations anymore. I didn't second guess every decision. I didn't look for approval before making a move, because I had already proven something to myself. I could build a life on my own terms. There were moments, quiet ones, when I'd catch my reflection in a mirror and pause, not because of how I looked, but because of who I had become. The girl who once felt trapped in her own home was now a woman who owned her space, her time, her future. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready for it. I didn't expect him to come back into my life. Not like that. Not when everything had finally settled. His name was Ethan. We had known each other long before everything fell apart, back when life was simpler, when I still believed that things like timing actually worked in your favor. He wasn't part of my past in a complicated way. He was the part I had to walk away from because I wasn't ready, because I didn't have control over my own life yet, and he knew that. He never pressured me, never asked me to choose. He just understood. And then one day, he was there again, standing across from me in a quiet cafe, looking exactly the same and completely different at the same time. "So," he said with a small smile, "you finally did it." I smiled back. "Yeah, I guess I did." There was no awkwardness, no tension, just something familiar, steady, real. We talked for hours that day, not about the past, not about what went wrong, but about who we had become. And somewhere in between those conversations, I realized something. This time, I wasn't choosing him because I needed an escape. I was choosing him because I wanted him in the life I had built, and that made all the difference. A few months later, everything felt steady, not rushed, not uncertain, just right. Ethan and I had built something simple but real. No pressure, no expectations forced on either of us. Just two people choosing each other, every single day. One evening, he asked me to meet him at the same cafe where we had reconnected. I didn't think much of it, until I walked in. The place was quieter than usual. A table near the window, set differently. Not extravagant, not dramatic, just intentional. He stood when he saw me, a small smile on his face, the kind that always made everything feel calm. "What's this?" I asked, half smiling as I walked over. "Something I've been meaning to do, the right way," he said. The right way, that alone, meant everything. He didn't rush, didn't make a speech that sounded rehearsed. He just looked at me, steady, certain. "I'm not here to offer you a life," he said quietly. "You already built one. I just want to be part of it." My chest tightened, not from pressure, from something softer, real. Then he reached into his pocket and got down on one knee. "No expectations, no conditions, just a question," he said. "Will you marry me?" For a second, everything else faded. No past, no fear, no control, just me, standing there, finally free to choose. And I did. Yes. Our wedding wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. It was small, personal, filled with people who actually mattered. And for the first time in my life, everything felt honest. My father was there, standing beside me, not as the man who stayed silent, but as someone who had finally chosen to be present. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. Some things don't need words, just change. When I walked down the aisle, I didn't feel like I was being given away. I felt like I was walking into something I had chosen, something I had earned. Later that evening, standing in the doorway of our new home, I paused for a moment. The lights were warm, the space was quiet, peaceful, mine. Not something controlled, not something forced, something built from nothing. I looked around and smiled, because this time, no one decided my future for me. I did. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe no one should ever control your life, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more real stories like this. Because sometimes, the strongest revenge is simply choosing yourself.